Capital punishment, also known as a death penalty, is a government-sanctioned practice that sentences one to death on the grounds of them being convicted of a heinous crime involving murder by a court of law. Now, this happens in the United States. About 28 out of the 50 states still allow it, which is honestly quite baffling considering the negative effects it has on society. Now, in this speech, I'm going to lay out to you the history and significance of capital punishment, as well as its problems it still has today, and a policy that would help abolish it. Now, to fully understand why capital punishment should be abolished, it's very important to learn about its history and significance. We can see capital punishment hitting the United States around the 1600s when Jamestown was built. Public hangings and burning people alive for treason and witchcraft were very popular during this time because the colony saw it as a deterrence. They felt that if people were to be executed for the crimes they committed, that this would scare or deter people from committing the same ones. Now, throughout the years, capital punishment has changed. There are regulations as to how it should be carried out, but as of right now, capital punishment is only inflicted on those who have been convicted by the jury of taking another person's life. So death by lethal injection is the primary method for capital punishment. However, depending on the state you live in, people can opt for hangings, for electrocution, lethal gas, or even a firing squad. And the reason why capital punishment was installed in the first place was to help weed out the no good in our society. It was supposed to guide us towards getting rid of heinous people, but now it seems like capital punishment has been actually doing more harm than good in our society. And the reason being in this day and age is that capital punishment does not deter crime. The innocent are wrongfully accused, and it's expensive. Now, the whole reason of capital punishment is to, in fact, deter crime. People who are for the death penalty argue that if a person is killed for a heinous crime they committed, that this would lower the crime rate as this person would not be able to commit more crimes, obviously. They also believe that by having the death penalty, this would essentially scare people who have future plans of committing crimes to stop in their tracks solely because they could be charged with capital punishment and die. Now, this seems like a logical explanation. However, there is no evidence to prove that capital punishment deters crime, but there is evidence that abolishing capital punishment actually deters crime. Now, looking at the Death Penalty Center, there was a report that studied the murder rates in 11 countries that have abolished capital punishment, and in their findings, they concluded that 10 of those countries experienced a decline in murder rates in the decade following abolition, and that the data is consistent with state-level data in the U.S., which has repeatedly shown lower murder rates in states that don't have the death penalty than in states that do. So seeing this information shows that having the death penalty has only brought sadness to our country. The citizens in those 28 states that allow capital punishment have killed people on the grounds that they believe that crime would be lowered, but that's not the case. It has only brought injustice into the U.S. and those on death row as well, especially the innocent. That brings me to my second point. Capital punishment is the biggest punishment one can receive in their life, and it's based on a court decision by a jury. And the verdict isn't always the truth. Sometimes the people we think did the crime are actually innocent and are framed for someone else's misconduct. You'd think that by now we would be able to bypass this and have all the facts in this day and age, but sadly that's not the case. In a study done by the National Academy of Science, approximately 4.1% of individuals on death row are innocent, and the number of innocent people is likely more than double the number of those actually exonerated and freed from death row. And in the US alone, 138 people have been exonerated due to evidence proving them innocent. Now, looking at this data, it is apparent to see how flawed this system is. A person on death row that is potentially innocent could die for a crime that they didn't even commit. Now, this doesn't sit right with me. Since the justice system is literally a game of chance, capital punishment should not exist for that very reason. There is not a 100% accuracy in the courts. It's based on evidence that sways a jury a certain way. An example of this happening would be Cameron Todd Williams' case. In 1994, he was charged with the murder of his 3 kids due to evidence of him setting him on fire. He was put to death on 2004 and was actually executed. Sadly, the Texas Forensic Science Commission reopened the case, and it turns out that the fire was an accident and it actually wasn't caused by William at all. So that meant that all of the evidence that was shown in court was misinterpreted and wasn't valid. I wanted to talk about this case so that you can see how messed up capital punishment is. It's an irreversible punishment, and with the courts not being 100% on any case, capital punishment should be abolished due to cases like Williams. It's such a tragedy to think about the people who have been sentenced to death that potentially could have been innocent. To take that leap and to full-heartedly believe in capital punishment is wrong when you can just give somebody a life sentence and reverse it if new information proves them innocent. Knowing that there is another alternative and still 28 states approve the death penalty is sickening. We can reduce the deaths of civilians by giving life sentences and help society morally and actually economically. That brings me to my third point. Another problem today with capital punishment is that it is very expensive to carry out. With these types of cases, it is very crucial that enough time and deliberation are had in order to prosecute someone with the intent of giving them capital punishment. Amnesty International claims that the greatest costs associated with the death penalty occur prior to and during the trial, but not in post-conviction proceedings. So even if all post-conviction proceedings appeals were abolished, the death penalty would still be more expensive than alternative sentences because there are great lengths that have to be included, such as jury selections, the two phases consisting of conviction and sentencing, and investigative costs. It may not seem like such a big deal, but when you look at the rough projected numbers, in the present, the amount of money going towards funding capital punishment is $137 million a year, and by implementing a reform, it would go up to $232.7 million, but would reduce to $11.5 million given with time and with life sentence replacing the death penalty. So economically, abolishing the death penalty is what we need in order to cut funding. Not only is the death penalty not working by deterring crime and potentially killing innocent people, it's also a huge money hog, and we can fix that by abolishing it. And the way that we can do this is to have the Supreme Court rule that the death penalty goes against the Eighth Amendment, which is the ban of cruel and unusual punishment. If this is to happen, the death penalty would no longer be legal in the United States. Instead, people on death row and those tried and convicted of heinous crimes would then serve life sentences. And over time, with the leftover money saved from not having capital punishment, this money could be used to fund rehabilitation. I mean, after all, these people are going to be incarcerated for the rest of their lives. You might as well try and help them become better people before they pass away. I feel that as a society, we forget that criminals are humans too. I mean, yes, there are people that are disturbed and do unspeakable things to others, but in order to help stop this, we need to abolish capital punishment and use other alternatives to help our nation. The US is a place that still supports capital punishment. It is still feasible even with the Eighth Amendment. Now, capital punishment must be abolished on the grounds that it has not been effective deterring crime, the fact that innocent people face being killed for crimes they didn't commit, and the expenses that come along with it. Now, I hope you've learned something from me today, and I hope that the takeaway you receive from this speech is that no matter how you look at it, capital punishment is a flawed and outdated system that deserves to be erased from our society.